A new education report shows an alarming drop-off in students' knowledge of U.S. history and civics, with teachers and education leaders blaming COVID closures and online learning for the plummeting test scores happening all over the country. But could what is being taught in the classroom be more to blame for that? Let's bring in Betsy DeVos, former education secretary. Madam Secretary, thank you very much for joining us. If I could just put this up on the screen, this is sort of, it shows in a line graph, if you will, 8th grade history scores now hitting an all-time low in this country. To what do you attribute this drop-off for our nation's children?
Well, Sandra, clearly the extended closures during COVID had something to do with it. But the reality is that those scores were headed that direction well before the pandemic. In fact, in 2017, I made a speech on National Constitution Day talking about these plummeting scores. This is what happens when you teach DEI, CRT, and the 1619 Project instead of the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Gettysburg Address. This is appalling, and when we consider that 87 out of 100 students are not even close to proficient in knowing U.S. history, it's a very concerning trend. And we should all be alarmed and say enough. Our government-run schools are not doing the job, and we need a change.
Well, it may sound obvious to most, but I'll just ask you the question. Lay it out for us. What is the harm with not teaching our nation's children our history?
Well, it's said that democracy dies in darkness. And we have evidence here that, again, our taxpayer-funded, union-controlled American government-run system is the one closing the blinds. Students are graduating school without a fundamental knowledge of civics, of their nation's founding, of U.S. history, and they're going forth into the world not able to think critically for themselves, not able to understand that when you disagree with someone else, that's okay. It's a constitutionally protected provision. Is it any wonder that we see all of these occasions where students think it's okay to just shout someone else down simply because they disagree with their opinion? What it's doing is not preparing the next generation to really take their place in our society in leadership roles that are going to continue to carry our country forward.
Really interesting stuff and really important stuff. This is Secretary Cardona currently on what is to blame for these dropping scores. The Education Secretary Cardona saying the latest data further affirms the profound impact the pandemic had on student learning in subjects beyond math and reading. It tells us that now is not the time for politicians to try to extract double-digit cuts to education funding, nor is it the time to limit what students learn in U.S. history and civics classes. What's he getting right? What's he getting wrong here, Madam Secretary?
Well, blaming it on the pandemic is nothing but a scapegoat. What has been happening here is a progression over a number of years where schools simply are not teaching history. They are simply not teaching civics, and students aren't learning it. The fact that, 87 out of 100 students are not considered proficient or don't have a fundamental knowledge of U.S. history is just inexcusable. We spend $750 billion a year on our K-12 education. We are not getting what we're spending.
I want to finish off by asking you to respond to PolitiFact actually tweeted this out, coming to Randy Weingarten's defense of the school shutdowns and the impact they had on their children. PolitiFact Teachers Union President Randy Weingarten advocated for reopening schools with pandemic safety measures. She criticized the Trump administration's 2020 calls to reopen schools fully, but it's misleading to claim that she opposed reopening at all. Well, the goal was to reopen, but looking back, shouldn't it be acknowledged that it didn't have to be shut in the first place?
Well, absolutely. Aside from the first couple of weeks, we know there were many schools that managed to reopen, mostly charter schools and private schools that wanted to get their kids back in the classroom. And her trying to revise history and gaslight the reality of what happened is simply inexcusable. America's parents know what happened, and they're starting to hold their systems accountable. This is the time to give parents the say and the control over where their kids learn. When the system is not doing its job, they need alternatives, and states are following that with policy to prove it.
All right, Secretary Betsy DeVos, we really appreciate you joining us on all of that, something we all care about and should care about and should set out to improve. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sandra.
All right, John.